In the summer of 1970, the underwater habitat Tektite 2 completed 10 missions in Lameshur Bay in St. John, USVI. When the Tektite 2 missions were complete, project manager Jan Koblik began planning for Tektite 3. During the process, Jan was informed that the USVI were not interested in financing another underwater habitat program, suggesting that Puerto Rico might be an option. Jan met with the governor of Puerto Rico, proposing a partnership to explore the waters around the island to help identify, protect, and develop the marine resources. With the help of government aid supportive of marine research, the Puerto Rico International Undersea Laboratory, PRINUL, became a reality. With an agreement in place, PRINUL was given a tract of land in southwest Puerto Rico to serve as a base of operations, and the work began. With nothing but a single building at what became known as the site, locals and future aquanauts alike pitched in to complete the breakwater, the main warehouse, and other infrastructure needed to support the operation of an underwater habitat. While work was underway at the site in Puerto Rico, construction of the underwater habitat, La Chalupa, was taking place at Perry Submarine in Riviera Beach, Florida. With the site taking shape, a number of PRINUL personnel traveled to Florida to help wrap up construction on La Chalupa and prepare her for a test mission. The aquanauts for the test mission were Ed Geiger, Jan Koblik, and Russell Lloyd. With a successful test mission complete, it was time to catch a ride to Puerto Rico with the U.S. Navy. Once the habitat made it to Puerto Rico, the crew began preparations for the first mission, which would begin on November 18, 1972. The aquanauts for the first mission were Morgan Wells, David Olson, Michael Sheen, and photographer John Larson. La Chalupa's first journey to the bottom in Puerto Rico did not go as planned. The habitat made the descent at a steep angle, causing one of the water beds to jump out of its frame and land on John's camera equipment. Documentation of the mission was delayed until they could drain the bed and free the equipment. With the heat and humidity being quite high inside the habitat, the aquanauts often wore little to no clothing to compensate. With the mission complete, the aquanauts settled in for 48 hours of decompression. Mission 1 was well documented with photos. Unfortunately, that's not the case for all missions. The aquanauts for Mission 2 were Mike Dugan, Frank Torres, Arthur Dahl, Sepul Kolmainen, and John Montgomery. They celebrated Christmas inside the habitat. Mission 3 aquanauts were Kenneth Waters, Gilberto Centron, James Parrish, Bruce Hager, and Terry Johnson. Very few photos exist of Mission 3. Mission 4 aquanauts were George Barlow, George Losi, Jaime Biaggi, Victor Greenberg, and Bud Morlock. The aquanauts for Mission 5 were Gilberto Centron, Faustino Mackenzie, Angel Nazario, Roberto Olazagasti, and Telo Ma. This was considered the Puerto Rican mission, as all the aquanauts were either Puerto Rican or, in the case of Telo Ma, worked for the Department of Natural Resources. Turned into one big Goya Foods commercial, which was kind of funny because the aquanauts didn't really care for the Goya Foods. This is demonstrated by safety diver Mike Kilbride showing his disdain for Goya grape juice. Mission 6 Aquanauts were Alan Waterfield, James Miller, Michael Sheen, and Jan Koblik. This was a 100-foot mission which would feature the use of the wet sub Reef Hunter. Smokey Roberts of Smokey's Diver's Den was on hand with his film camera to capture the only moving pictures of the PRINUL project.
Living at a depth of 100 feet for 2 weeks requires enormous stamina and physical fitness. In addition to regular exercise, tests were conducted to establish baseline reference points for undersea physical studies. A radio check to the tow vessel confirms that the habitat and support vessel are ready to go. Within 1.5 hours, the habitat is 10 miles offshore. Koblik and Waterfield had to bail out of their mini-sub when it failed and headed to the surface. The next morning, 2 Puerto Rican fishermen reported a very strange catch.
Being fast as we can go in a boat, being followed by an airplane, spotting the Reef Hunter. The Reef Hunter is an underwater submarine, a wet submarine, worth about $5,000.
Mission 7 Aquanauts, Carl Berg, Joe McGowan, Eric Preston, and Jay Lynn Preston. They're famous for getting lost on their first dive, having to surface to find the habitat, and resetting saturation tables forever. The Aquanauts for Mission 8 were Mike Kilbride, Seppo Kolmainen, Frank Milhone, Neil Money, and Bruce Rankin. During this mission, a particular barracuda got a bit frisky and ended up in the freezer. The Aquanauts for Mission 9 were Lawrence McCloskey, David Olson, Sumner Richmond, Yossi Loya, and Morgan Wells. The initial PRINUL budget called for 9 missions. With those complete, it was time to secure additional funding so more missions could be scheduled. With a shaky economy and a change in government oversight, that proved to be difficult. Only 2 more missions were scheduled. Mission 10 Aquanauts were James Miller, Alan Waterfield, Jan Koblik, and Seppo Kolmainen. This was the second 100-foot mission and part of the PRINUL program designed to test excursion tables for divers who are saturated at 100 feet. The Aquanauts for the final mission, which took place in March of 1974, were Roberto Castro, Jose Rivera, Joe Kimmel, Tom Purcell, and Eric Brown. The Manned Undersea Science and Technology Report from 1976 suggested that it would be too costly to prepare La Chalupa for further missions, which is why if you were watching the movie Hot Stuff in 1979, you might have seen a strange-looking contraption in the background of some scenes as La Chalupa was parked in Miami Harbor. In the early 80s, La Chalupa was acquired by Jan Koblik and Neil Money, who partnered to create Jules Undersea Lodge in Key Largo, Florida, giving thousands the opportunity to experience working and living in the sea. Despite the shift to commercial operations, scientific missions are still a big part of Jules Undersea Lodge. In May of 1992, La Chalupa 30 took place, featuring Chris Olstad, Rick Presley, and John Conant. A 30-day isolation mission jointly sponsored by MRDF and NASA. Many other experiments were completed during this time. In the fall of 2014, college professors Bruce Cantrell and Jessica Fain would enter the habitat for the Classroom in the Sea program. 73 days, 2 hours, and 34 minutes later, they would emerge as the world record holders for time spent in a fixed underwater habitat. In October of 2019, Joe DeTuri, Shauna Pandya, Douglas Campbell, Kyle Foster, and Paul Bacon entered the habitat for the 5-day Project Neptune mission. They were able to carry an Explorers Club flag with them. Since 2021, Dr. Hunter Hines, a contributor to the Brave Wilderness YouTube channel, has completed 3 missions and a number of experiments. His tardigrade experiment, which mirrored one taking place on the International Space Station, was featured on Wired. In late November, the Brave Wilderness YouTube channel will feature the 24-hour Aquanaut Challenge. Since its construction in 1972, the underwater habitat La Chalupa has made significant contributions to the fields of manned undersea exploration and marine science, and it's not done yet. We look forward to the programs that will take place in the habitat in 2023 and beyond. This video was produced and narrated by the kid on the left who spent 14 months in Puerto Rico while his dad Frank was the diving director for PRINUL.